I never believed in the whole soulmate thing until I met someone who could finish my sentences. Not in that annoying way where people think they know what you're going to say and cut you off. No, this was different. This was Marcus, understanding the thoughts I hadn't even fully formed yet, seeing the words tangled up in my mind and gently pulling them free. And the strangest part? I could do the same for him. It started 3 months ago at the worst possible moment in my life, and somehow became the best thing that ever happened to me. I was sitting in my therapist's waiting room, staring at a magazine I wasn't reading, trying to convince myself I wasn't having a complete breakdown. 28 years old, and I'd just walked away from a 6-year relationship, a job I'd convinced myself I loved, and an entire life plan that had crumbled like wet cardboard. My ex, David, had looked at me 2 weeks earlier and said I was becoming a stranger. The irony was, I'd never felt more like myself. I just finally admitted I was gay after years of trying to make myself fit into a version of life that looked right on paper, but felt wrong in every other way. The waiting room was one of those aggressively calming spaces with watercolor paintings of beaches and a small fountain that burbled in the corner. I was early as usual because being late made my anxiety spike. That's when he walked in. Tall, with dark curly hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times, wearing a faded band t-shirt under a blazer that somehow worked. He had this energy about him, like he was carrying something heavy but refusing to put it down. He sat across from me, and I went back to pretending to read. But then I heard him mutter something under his breath. Why do they always have these magazines about organizing your life when your life is literally why you're here? I looked up, and he was staring at the same type of magazine in his hands. Our eyes met, and I laughed before I could stop myself. Right? Like, thanks, I'll just Marie Kondo my depression. His face broke into this unexpected smile, and something in my chest shifted. Does your trauma spark joy? No? Thank it for its service and let it go, he said, and we both started laughing, the kind that's a little too loud for a therapist's waiting room. I'm Marcus, he said, extending his hand across the small space between us. James, I replied, shaking it. His hand was warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. We talked for the 15 minutes before my appointment, and it felt like coming up for air after being underwater for years. He was a high school English teacher, going through his own crisis, questioning whether he'd chosen his career to make his parents happy, or because it actually fulfilled him. When my therapist's door opened and she called my name, I felt genuinely disappointed to leave. Same time next week? Marcus asked as I stood up. Yeah, Wednesdays at 4, I said. Me too, 5 o'clock. He smiled. Maybe we can grab coffee after. Compare notes on our existential dread. I agreed, probably too quickly, and spent my entire therapy session distracted by the thought of him sitting in that waiting room. The next week, we got coffee at this place around the corner. It was one of those converted warehouse spaces with exposed brick and too many plants, the kind of place that serves oat milk lattes and plays indie music you've never heard but immediately want to download. We sat by the window, and the late afternoon sun caught in his hair, turning it almost bronze. We talked about everything. His fear that he was living someone else's life, my fear that I'd wasted years being someone I wasn't. The conversation flowed in this easy way that made me forget to be self-conscious. And then something strange started happening. He was telling me about a confrontation with his department head about changing the curriculum, and he paused mid-sentence, searching for words. It's just, I wanted to tell him that the books we're teaching are so disconnected from what the kids are actually experiencing, I finished, the words just appearing in my mind. He stared at me. Yeah, exactly that. I shrugged it off as coincidence, but it kept happening. I'd start to explain my complicated feelings about my ex, and Marcus would gently complete the thought I was struggling to articulate. You don't hate him, you just... I hate that I spent so long trying to be what he needed instead of figuring out what I needed, I said, and he nodded like he'd known that's where I was going. By our third coffee date, we'd stopped calling them coffee dates and started calling them what they were, dates, real dates. The kind where you lose track of time and the barista has to politely tell you they're closing. The kind where you walk slowly to your cars, taking the long way, inventing reasons to keep talking. One night, about a month in, we were at his apartment. He lived in this old building with hardwood floors that creaked and windows that didn't quite close all the way, letting in the sound of the city. We were on his couch, ostensibly watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to, and he was telling me about his childhood, about being the only kid in his family who loved books, who wanted to talk about ideas instead of sports. My dad used to look at me like like you were speaking a language he didn't understand, and instead of learning it, he just decided you were the problem, I said quietly. Marcus turned to me, and there were tears in his eyes. How do you do that? Do what? Know exactly what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. It's like you're inside my head. I touched his face, my thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. Maybe because I felt the same way. Maybe because when you've spent years not being understood, you become really good at understanding others. He kissed me then, soft and tentative, like he was asking a question. I kissed him back, answering, yes. Yes to this. Yes to him. Yes to finally feeling like someone saw me completely. We started spending almost every evening together. His place or mine, it didn't matter. We'd cook dinner badly, laughing as we burned pasta or oversalted vegetables. We'd read on opposite ends of the couch, our legs tangled together, occasionally reading passages aloud to each other. We'd talk until 2 a.m. about philosophy and fear, and what it meant to build a life that actually felt like yours. But the sentence finishing thing kept happening, and it started to unsettle both of us. It wasn't just completing obvious thoughts anymore. It was deeper than that. Uncanny. One Saturday afternoon, we were at the farmer's market, walking through the stalls of overpriced organic produce and artisanal bread. Marcus stopped at a vendor selling old vinyl records, flipping through them with the focused attention he brought to everything. He pulled one out, stared at it, and his expression changed. This album, he started, his voice strange. It reminds you of your sister, I said, the knowledge just there, solid and certain. He looked at me, and I saw something like fear flash across his face. I never told you about my sister. My stomach dropped. You didn't? No. He put the record back carefully. She died when I was 15. Car accident. This was her favorite album. She played it constantly that last summer. We walked away from the market, finding a bench in a nearby park. The air felt heavy, charged with something neither of us wanted to name. James, this is getting weird, Marcus said, not looking at me. It's not just finishing sentences anymore. You know things you shouldn't know. And he trailed off. You do it too, I finished. You know things about me I haven't told you. He nodded. Your mom's favorite flowers are peonies. You broke your arm falling out of a tree when you were 9. You're afraid of dogs because one bit you when you were a kid. I never told you any of that. We sat in silence, watching people pass by. Couples holding hands, parents chasing toddlers, normal people living normal lives, not questioning the fundamental nature of their connection to another person. Maybe we should take a break, Marcus said finally, and the words hit me like a physical blow. Figure out what this is, whether it's healthy. Or maybe, I said, my voice shaking, maybe we stop being scared of it. Maybe this is what connection actually feels like when you've spent your whole life settling for less. You don't think it's strange that we can read each other's minds? I think it's terrifying, I admitted. But I also think I've been terrified of good things my entire life because I didn't trust them. I talked myself out of being gay for years because it felt too complicated, too different from what I thought my life should look like. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to walk away from you because our connection doesn't fit some normal template. Marcus turned to me, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Fear versus hope. Safety versus possibility. What if we lose ourselves in each other, he asked. What if we become so connected we forget how to be individuals? What if we don't, I countered. What if this is just what it feels like when someone truly understands you? Not completes you because that's bullshit. We're both complete people, but understands you. We went back to his apartment and spent the rest of the day talking about it, really talking, about boundaries and identity and the difference between unhealthy codependence and healthy intimacy, about how we'd both been so isolated for so long that real connection felt foreign and frightening. I think, Marcus said, as evening light slanted through his windows, I've been treating this like it's something wrong with us instead of something right. Me too, I admitted. So we try? We try. The next few weeks, we made an effort to maintain our individual lives. I started going to a writing group I'd been interested in. Marcus joined a basketball league, something he'd loved in high school, but given up. We spent evenings apart, then came back together and shared what we'd experienced. And the strange thing was, the sentence finishing didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger, but we started to understand it differently. It wasn't that we were losing ourselves in each other. It was that we'd both become so good at hiding our true thoughts and feelings that finding someone who could see through that was revelatory. We weren't reading minds. We were reading each other with the attention and care that comes from genuine love. My therapist, when I finally told her about it, smiled in that knowing way therapists do. James, what you're describing is attunement. It's what happens when two people are genuinely present with each other. When you're not performing or hiding, when you're just being, you start to pick up on patterns, micro-expressions, the tiny tells that reveal what someone's thinking or feeling. It feels like magic, but it's actually just intimacy. I told Marcus what she'd said that night, and he laughed, relieved. So we're not having some weird psychic connection. I mean, maybe a little bit, I teased, but mostly we're just paying attention to each other in a way most people don't. I like that, he said, pulling me closer on the couch. I like being seen by you. I like seeing you, I replied. 3 months in, and I'm learning that love isn't about finding someone who completes you or someone who's exactly like you. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and chooses to stay. Someone who can finish your sentences, not because they're trying to speak for you, but because they've listened so carefully they know the shape of your thoughts. Last night, we were lying in bed, that space between awake and asleep, where everything feels possible. Marcus was tracing patterns on my shoulder, and I was watching shadows move across the ceiling. I've been thinking, he started. About moving in together, I said. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me with that expression that still makes my heart skip. You know, most people would find this annoying. Most people aren't us. True. He kissed my forehead. But actually, I was going to say I've been thinking about how lucky I am, that I walked into that waiting room on that specific day, that you were there, that we were both brave enough to be broken in front of each other. I pulled him down, kissing him properly. See, I didn't finish that sentence. No, he agreed, smiling against my lips. But you knew the important part, that it was about us, about this. We fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being known. I wasn't afraid of being seen. Because being seen by Marcus didn't make me feel exposed or vulnerable in a bad way. It made me feel real. This morning, over coffee in his kitchen, he was reading the news on his phone and I was attempting to make pancakes. He looked up and started to say something, then stopped. What? I asked. I was going to say something cheesy about how you make terrible pancakes, but I love you anyway, but then I realized you probably already knew that. I did know that, I confirmed, both the terrible pancakes part and the love part. Does it bother you that we can't surprise each other? I flipped a pancake, watching it land slightly off-center in the pan. You surprise me every day, not because I don't know what you're thinking, but because I keep discovering new things to love about you. Like how you organize your books by color instead of author, which is objectively wrong but somehow perfect for you. Or how you sing off-key in the shower and don't care. Or how you look at me like I'm the most interesting person you've ever met, even when I'm just making terrible pancakes. Marcus came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. For the record, they're not that terrible. They're pretty terrible, I laughed. Okay, they're terrible, but I love that you keep trying. We ate the terrible pancakes and drank our coffee, and I thought about the man I was 3 months ago, sitting in that waiting room, convinced I'd ruined my life by finally being honest about who I was, terrified that choosing authenticity meant choosing loneliness. I couldn't have imagined this, not just Marcus, but what he represents. The possibility that being yourself doesn't mean being alone. That there are people in the world who will see all of you, the messy, complicated parts and the simple, joyful parts, and choose to stay, choose to love you, choose to build something real with you. You're thinking deep thoughts, Marcus observed, watching me over his coffee mug. I'm thinking about how grateful I am, I said, for that waiting room, for your terrible taste in magazines, for every moment that led us here. See, now you're the one being cheesy. You love it. I really do, he agreed, and in his eyes, I could see my own thoughts reflected back at me. Not because we were the same person, but because we'd chosen to really know each other, to pay attention, to care enough to understand not just the words, but the meaning behind them. People talk about soulmates like it's some mystical predestined thing, like there's one person out there who's meant for you, and you just have to find them. But I don't think that's how it works. I think soulmates are made, not found. They're built through choice and effort and the daily decision to show up for someone, to see them, to let yourself be seen. Marcus isn't my other half. He's not the missing piece that makes me whole. He's a whole person who chose to walk beside another whole person, and together we're building something neither of us could have built alone. Something that feels like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. And yeah, he can finish my sentences. He knows my mind sometimes better than I do. But that's not magic or fate or cosmic connection. That's just what happens when someone loves you enough to really listen, to pay attention, to care about the things you care about, and fear the things you fear and hope for the things you hope for. That's the real love story, not the sentence finishing or the uncanny moments of shared thought, but the choice we make every day to be present with each other, to be honest, to be brave enough to be vulnerable and patient enough to understand. I used to think being known was dangerous, that if someone saw all of me, they'd leave. But Marcus taught me that being known is actually the point. That intimacy isn't about protecting yourself or performing a version of yourself you think someone will love. It's about showing up as exactly who you are and trusting that's enough. And with him, it is. With him, I'm enough. Not because he completes me or fixes me or changes me, but because he sees me, really sees me, and stays. That's what I want to tell anyone out there who's sitting in their own version of that waiting room, convinced they've ruined everything by finally being honest about who they are. You haven't ruined anything. You've just made space for something real. And somewhere out there, there's someone who will see you completely and think you're exactly what they've been looking for. Someone who will finish your sentences, not because they're trying to speak for you, but because they've listened so carefully, they know the shape of your thoughts. Someone who will know your mind better than you do sometimes. And instead of being scared of that intimacy, you'll be grateful for it. That's what love is. Not the fairy tale version where everything's easy and perfect, but the real version where two people choose each other every day, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it means being more vulnerable than you've ever been. Marcus just walked back into the room with more coffee, and he's looking at me with that expression that means he knows exactly what I'm thinking about. And you know what? I'm not going to finish this thought out loud. I'm going to let him ask. Because sometimes the best part of being known isn't the knowing itself, but the conversation that comes after, the endless discovery of another person, the joy of being surprised by someone you thought you knew completely. "What are you smiling about?" he asks, sitting down next to me, and I tell him everything, because that's what we do. We talk. We listen. We see each other. And we stay. Total char count, 24,847.